3 days ago, my son sold my house without my permission. Today, he's standing on my doorstep, rain dripping from the hood of his sweatshirt, shoes leaving wet prints on the welcome mat. His head is bowed, shoulders curled forward, the posture of a man who knows he's lost. I know that look well. I wore it myself once. But not today. Today, I am the man who has nothing left to lose and everything to take back. The morning was cool, the kind of gray Pacific Northwest chill that sinks into your bones. I'd been standing in my small kitchen, a mug of freshly ground espresso in my hands, watching a thin fog lift off the street. My apartment was nothing special: 2 rooms, creaky hardwood floors, a view of the brick wall across the alley, but it was quiet, and it was mine. For now. When the knock came, I already knew who it was. There are knocks you recognize without hearing them often, the quick, uncertain triple tap of someone who's rehearsed it all the way up the stairs. I opened the door to see Ethan. My son. My only son. 32 years old, jawline sharp enough to be charming, dark hair matted from the rain. His eyes flicked up to meet mine, and in that brief moment I saw it. Not guilt, not shame, but calculation. "Dad," he said, voice light but thin around the edges. "I need to talk." I leaned against the doorframe. "Talk." He glanced down the hallway, as if checking for witnesses. "Inside. Please." I stepped aside, not because I was ready to forgive him, but because I wanted him to see what 3 days without a home looked like. A mismatched sofa from a thrift store, a coffee table with one leg shorter than the others, the faint smell of paint from where the landlord had covered water stains. 3 days earlier, my life had still been my own. That morning, I had returned from the grocery store to find a silver SUV parked in my driveway, a moving truck idling at the curb, and 2 strangers carrying my dining chairs out the front door. At first, I thought I'd stumbled into someone else's mess. Then I saw Ethan on the porch, clipboard in hand, wearing the confident smile he always put on when he wanted to sell you something. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice louder than I intended. He turned, his smile broadening. "Dad, you're back early. This is, good news." "In what world is strangers hauling my furniture good news?" "In this one," he said, holding up the clipboard like a magician revealing a trick. "I sold the house." "Great deal. Over asking. We can split the money and put it into something that'll double in a year." I just stared at him. "You sold my house?" "Technically our house," he said quickly, "but yeah, don't freak out. It's all legal." It wasn't legal. My name was still on the deed. The papers bore my signature, but I hadn't touched a pen. I felt the ground tilt under me. Ethan had forged my name. He must have read my face because he rushed in with, "Look, you're always talking about retiring somewhere warm. This is your chance. I've got an opportunity lined up, low risk, huge upside." The rest of his pitch was drowned out by the pounding of my heart. 30 years of mortgage payments, repairs, weekend projects, the porch swing where his mother used to drink tea, the maple tree we planted the year he was born, sold like an old car at a yard sale. That night, I packed one suitcase and drove to a budget motel off the highway. The neon sign flickered, and the lobby smelled of stale coffee and cheap disinfectant. My room had a bed with a comforter patterned in faded flowers, a single chair, and a television bolted to the wall. I lay there on the stiff mattress, listening to the hum of the ice machine down the hall, thinking about the $10 bill Ethan had pressed into my hand before I left. "For gas," he'd said like it was some act of kindness. Anger burned hot, then cold. I could have gone to the police, called him out publicly. But somewhere between the midnight news and the sound of rain against the window, a different idea began to take shape. If Ethan thought he was playing chess, he'd made his move too soon. I wasn't about to flip the board. No, I'd bide my time, let him think he'd won, and then make a move he wouldn't see coming. The next morning, I called Mark. Old friend, property lawyer, a man who'd once owed me a favor. I told him everything, the forged signature, the quick sale, the mystery investment Ethan had mentioned. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was a pause. Then, give me 48 hours. Don't contact him. Don't let him know you're doing anything. I'll handle the legal side. You focus on staying quiet. I hung up, stared at the peeling paint on the motel wall, and felt the first spark of control return. Ethan thought he'd taken everything from me. What he didn't know was that I was about to take everything from him. I woke before my alarm, the kind of early that isn't about rest, but about resolve. The motel room hummed with a low, constant noise, the AC's tired fan, the fridge clicking on and off, a Simi's brakes hissing somewhere out on the highway. I brewed the in-room coffee and took one sip before pouring it down the sink. It tasted like scorched paper. I rinsed the mug twice and stood at the window with tap water instead, watching a thin rain stipple the parking lot. Somewhere in that gray morning, the feeling crystallized. I wasn't the man in exile anymore. I was the man coming back. Mark texted at 7:11 a.m. exactly. Headed into court for an emergency hearing. Don't call Ethan. Don't post anything. Sit tight. I'll update you. I typed thank you and put the phone face down. The temptation to do something dramatic was a live wire in my hands. Rage wanted noise, sirens, confrontation, spectacle. But legal justice prefers quiet. It moves in paperwork, in signatures, in stamps that say filed. I started with the public record. The county recorder's website was a maze that never bothered to pretend user-friendliness. Still, I could feel the old rhythms coming back. Search parcels, drill into deeds, view PDFs. There it was, a warranty deed recorded 2 days prior. The signature that looked like mine but wasn't. The notary stamp I didn't recognize. I stared at the curve of the forged H, the way it looped too neatly. My real hand never looped like that. I took screenshots, downloaded copies, printed to a PDF folder, and named it Fake Deed because I wanted the label to sting when I looked at it. Then I called the moving company. A woman answered with a sunshine voice that sounded printed on the script in front of her. I gave her the job number I'd scribbled off the foreman's clipboard. "Yes, sir, that's a 2-truck move," she chirped. "From your address to a storage facility on 27th, unit already rented by a gentleman named Ethan Hart, paid in full." Paid in full, with my equity. I asked for a copy of the invoice and the name on the credit authorization. She hesitated, and I let a different register drop into my voice, the one that says lawyer will call, the one learned by men who have actually had to hire them. "Sure thing," she said. "Email?" I called the realtor next. The name on the listing was a young guy. I could tell by the gloss on his headshot, all teeth and pocket square. He didn't pick up, so I left a message. "This is the homeowner of—" "Yes, the homeowner. Call me." He returned the call in 8 minutes with an apology avalanche. He'd been told I was traveling. He'd been told Ethan had power of attorney. He'd been told so many things. "You saw a signed deed. You saw funds in escrow. You saw a notary stamp," I said flatly. "You saw a performance." Silence. Then, "Sir, if there was fraud, the buyer deserves to be made whole. And you, I'm so sorry." He sounded young on the last word. "Good. Let him learn." The buyer surprised me. He was a middle-aged engineer named Carter, with a voice like cedar, measured, practical. "I like your house," he said. "I have a kid who loved the maple in the backyard." We thought, he trailed off. I could hear him sorting through the emotion and putting it in a labeled box, the way orderly minds do. When I told him about the forgery, he didn't argue. He asked 2 questions. How do we fix it? And how do I get my money back? I told him Mark was petitioning for a temporary restraining order, an injunction to freeze any transfer, and a lease pendants to cloud title. I promised him one thing I could actually keep. You won't lose $1. When we hung up, I liked him more than any of the other voices I'd heard that morning. Every call hardened a layer in me I didn't know I had. I had spent years being the man who could be counted on, the extra shift, the lunch packed, the bills paid a day early. I thought steadiness was enough to teach a son how to stand. But steadiness can look like a wall. Some kids press against it to feel where it ends. Ethan had learned how to lean, not how to build. Mark called just before noon. I stood in the motel's breezeway while rain whispered off the eaves. "We have a TRO," he said without preamble. The judge granted the temporary restraining order. No transfer, no encumbrance, no funny business. Sheriff will post notice. I've recorded a lease pendens. Title is officially mud. I've also filed a motion to void the deed for fraud and lack of capacity. Don't bristle at that. It's language that works. We'll follow with the declaratory judgment. I want a handwriting expert to compare signatures and the notary's log subpoenaed. I also want you to breathe. I am, I said, and realized I had not, in fact, taken a full breath since Tuesday. I filled my lungs with damp motel air and let it out slow. What about the money? Escrow shows a wire out to Ethan's account the day of closing, Mark replied, paper shuffling faintly on his end. A portion immediately wired again to a private fund managed by a Kellen Drake. That name ring a bell? It did. Not as a bell, more like a siren. Local news ran a piece last year about a Drake Capital, promising 12% monthly returns and secured bridge loans. It smelled like a Ponzi from the headline. Same guy, Mark said. We'll send a demand to Drake. We won't get it back from him. But we'll freeze Ethan's remaining funds and pursue restitution through the criminal lane as needed. I've already pinged the DA's office about potential forgery and elder financial abuse. I didn't promise anything. I just planted the seed. Good, I said. The word felt clean on my tongue. What do you need from me? Patience, he said, and then his lawyer voice softened into a friend's. And do not, under any circumstance, go see him to set him straight. He will dangle apologies and distractions and emergency stories. Let him hang himself with his own rope. He's already thrown the knot. After we hung up, I drove to the bank. The branch manager knew me by name. 30 years of deposits and withdrawals, Christmas cards with stock photos of smiling families. He took me into his glass office and closed the door. He was careful and kind, and when he slid the printed statements across the desk, he did it with the gravity of a doctor delivering news. On paper, it looked so neat. Sale proceeds in. Wire out. Wire out. The trail ran in lines and columns, tidy as a ledger in a classroom problem, except for the part where those columns represented the violence done to a life. Can we reverse any of it? I asked. We can freeze the remainder in his account based on a court order, he said, tapping the TRO Mark had emailed ahead. We've placed a hold. The Drake transfer is gone unless they choose to send it back voluntarily. His eyebrows lifted almost imperceptibly at the last word. We both knew what it meant. I thanked him and walked out past the candy bowl, the pamphlets advertising home equity lines as if those were nothing but opportunity. In the parking lot, the rain had thinned to mist. I stood there with my hands on the roof of my car and felt a strange steadiness again. The damage had been done, but the wound was clean now. We were past the mess of discovery and into the work of repair and consequence. At the storage facility, a teenager with a lip ring checked the system and gave me a printed receipt for Unit B-114. I stood in the metal corridor smelling cold concrete and dust while a keypad chirped and a roll-up door rattled upward. My life sat there in rectangles, boxes labeled kitchen, living room, hall closet, and a handwriting that wasn't mine. The maple table I'd sanded twice, the worn arm of the leather chair where a small boy once balanced on my forearm, feet on my thigh, yelling, "Higher!" When you see 30 years of your life stacked behind corrugation and a cheap lock, you understand storage is not a service. It is a humiliation. I closed the door, signed for the hold, and walked back down the corridor, feeling the echo of my own footsteps. I drove past the old house, but didn't stop. The maple in the yard shook off rain, bronze leaves plastered against the trunk. Through the front window, I could see the bare imprint where the sofa had been, a lighter rectangle on the hardwood that marked the outline of a life. The porch swing hung still. A young woman in a new sedan idled at the curb, looking at her phone. The world was moving, as it always does, whether or not we are ready. In the motel that evening, I spread everything on the bedspread like a general laying out a campaign. PDFs printed at the lobby computer, emails, receipts, Mark's filings. I arranged them in groups, what he did, what we can prove, what comes next, because order is a bomb. I found a yellow pad and wrote a single sentence at the top of the page. He will tell you he's sorry when he is hungry. Underline. Underline. Then I did something that seemed, at first, like a betrayal of myself. I called Ethan. I made my voice light. Hey, kid. Been thinking. You chuckled, relief, thin and brittle. Dad. Good. I've been, swamped. What's up? I came into some money, I said, casual as weather. Insurance. Old policy I forgot existed. Not crazy, but enough to do something with. You mentioned an opportunity. He didn't leap. He lunged. Dad, this is perfect timing. I'm talking monthly returns. We're in on the ground floor. My partner, I trust you. I lied, making sure it sounded true. But I want to see you. Let's talk in person. Saturday morning. My place. He hesitated just a second. He always hated mornings, and then he smoothed it over. 10 works. 10, I said, and ended the call before the conversation could become anything else. I sat there in the motel quiet, phone face up on the bedspread, watching the black glass stare back. The word partner hung in the air like a smell. Behind it, I could hear the other words lining up: bridge loan, guaranteed, secured, paperwork later. I was asking him to come with his hunger on his face. I needed him to. Bring it. He would. Mark answered on the second ring. You said it? He asked. Saturday at 10. I'll be there at 9:45, he said. I'll bring an investigator to witness. We'll put the papers on the table. If he takes the bait and pitches you a deal, we record. Then we slide the TRO, the lawsuit draft, and the DA intake form across. No yelling. No moral speeches. Let the paper do the talking. I want to say something, I admitted, and heard how small that sounded next to the machinery he was assembling. You'll get your minute, he said. But remember, consequences land harder when they arrive in envelopes. Sleep came in fits that night. Twice I jolted awake from the same dream. I was back at the house, and the maple was inside the living room, its roots cracking the floorboards while leaves brushed the ceiling. In the dream, I couldn't decide whether to grab an axe or water it. I woke with the taste of iron in my mouth both times. Friday ran like a metronome. Mark texted updates every couple of hours. The clerk stamped this, the sheriff posted that, the handwriting expert took a first look and will swear to an affidavit by Monday. He'd found the notary whose stamp had witnessed my fake signature. The notary's logbook had no entry for my name. This is good, Mark wrote. Messy for them. Clean for us. At lunch, Carter, the buyer with the cedar voice, called again. Your lawyer reached out. He's thorough. I smiled even though he couldn't see it. We're refunding you Monday, I said. Direct wire from escrow. You'll be whole. He was quiet a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had shifted an inch toward something warmer. I didn't just like the house, he said. I liked the way it felt when I walked in. There's a difference. I'm sorry this happened to you. We hung up without a promise of friendship, which made me like him more. I spent the afternoon on small, practical things. I bought a better shirt. I found a proper coffee and drank it on a bench under a tree that was not my tree. I picked up a second folding chair for the apartment because I realized inexplicably that I hated the idea of Mark standing while Ethan sat. The details mattered, not to him, to me. That evening the rain stopped and the sky cracked open in that particular way it does here, a wide strip of pale blue between two long gray bands. I watched a couple arguing quietly in the motel parking lot, hands tight, voices low. The woman gestured toward a toddler in a car seat. The man looked at the ground. They weren't my business, but I recognized the choreography, the way love tries to make room for consequences, and consequences push back, asking for all of it. I turned away and made a sandwich I didn't taste. At 9:41 Saturday morning, Mark texted outside. I buzzed him up. He arrived with a leather folio, an investigator named Tanya with a quiet presence and a small camera, and a look that said, "We are doing this now." We sat at the thrift store table, and I realized that the wobble didn't matter this morning. There were steadier things in the room. "You ready?" Mark asked. "Yes," I said, and then I surprised myself by meaning it without reservation. At 9:59, footsteps sounded in the hallway, too fast for the stairs, too slow for a man who runs. The knock came a second later, that same uncertain rhythm from 3 days earlier. I opened the door. Ethan looked like a man who had slept in panic. His hair had the wrong part, his hoodie was zipped too high, and his pupils scanned the room like he was reading a paragraph where he already knew the ending. He saw Mark. He saw Tanya. He did a little calculation on the fly and then pasted on a smile anyway. "Dad," he said, "what's with the audience?" "Come in," I said. He stood just inside the door, like stepping farther would trigger a trap. He glanced at the folio on the table. "What's that?" "Sit," I said, and he did because hunger is obedient. Mark opened the folio. He did not make a speech. He began where the law begins. "Mr. Hart, I represent your father. On Thursday, we obtained a temporary restraining order against any transfer or encumbrance of 412 Maple Avenue. We have filed a complaint to void the deed on grounds of fraud, forgery, and failure of authorization. We have clouded title with the lease pendants. Here is a copy of each document." He slid them across the table like a dealer laying out cards. "We will also be referring this matter to the district attorney, including evidence of a forged signature and a notary irregularity. Your father has also authorized me to pursue civil damages for conversion and fraud." Ethan's face went gray in a way I had not seen since he was 8, and broke the neighbor's window with a baseball, and then saw the neighbor standing in the doorway. He looked at me, not at the papers, and spoke to me like Mark and Tanya were scenery. "Dad, what are you doing?" "I am putting things in the correct places," I said quietly. He blinked hard. Twice, and found the one card he knows how to play. "I'm your son." Mark said nothing, and in his not saying was an entire monastery's worth of discipline. Tanya's camera lens didn't blink at all. "I know," I said, "which is why you're sitting at a table and not in a room with a detective." Yet, he pulled the first page toward him and scanned with the desperation of a man looking for a word that will save him. He found different ones. Forgery. Restraining. Freeze. He swallowed. "It wasn't like that," he tried. "You were going to retire anyway." I just accelerated the timeline. "The deal, your partner Drake is a criminal," I said. "He will not make you rich. He will make you hungry. You know what hungry people do?" I leaned in so he had to either meet my eyes or stare at the papers. They tell the truth, or they lie better. Today you'll do one of those. He opened his mouth and tried on a few words. "I can fix" didn't fit. It was a mistake didn't either. "We're family" looked like a coat he borrowed that hung wrong in the shoulders. He finally found a sentence that felt like his. "If you give me a week, I can triple it." Mark exhaled a breath that might have been a laugh in a different life. "No, you can't," he said mildly. "Here's the other stack." He opened the folio again and slid a second set of documents forward, a draft criminal complaint cover sheet, a DA intake form with lines already filled, a letter to the bank locking his remaining funds, a demand to Drake Capital served through their registered agent. Even the envelopes looked heavier than an ordinary day. Ethan reached for something that wasn't there. His phone, a story, a mother. He found just the table's cheap laminate. "Dad," he said. Not a sentence. An invocation. "I'm going to say this once," I said. I hadn't planned to speak. Mark had asked me not to. But there is a place inside a father that only opens when the child he raised brings him to it, and we were standing on that threshold now. You forged my name. You took my home. You picked up 30 years of my life and sold it like a used lawnmower. You did not ask. You did not apologize. You told me to relax. I have been doing the opposite ever since. I have been working." His mouth trembled, not with tears, but with effort. He wanted to assemble words into a shape that could shield him. "There are no such shapes. You are going to sign an acknowledgement that you sold the property without authorization," Mark said, his voice smooth stone again. "You are going to consent to the voiding of the deed to expedite the process, and you are going to agree to a stipulated judgment for restitution. If you refuse, we will pursue every remedy, criminal and civil. You will not like how that feels. You might not like this either. But this is the part where you experience your life as a series of consequences." Ethan stared at the line where his signature was supposed to go, the irony floating between us like heat off asphalt. "If I sign," he said slowly, "do I go to jail?" "I don't control that," Mark said. "But cooperation is a language prosecutors speak. Loudly." Something in Ethan deflated, not a noble surrender, not a revelation, just the air leaving a plan. He picked up the pen. His hands were not steady. He signed his name in his real hand, and the sight of it, the honest slant of the E, the small, cramped T, hurt in a way I hadn't prepared for. Whatever else he was still the boy who had once pressed a dandelion into my palm like a treasure and said, "Keep this." He set the pen down like it weighed something. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you tell me everything," I said. "Every transfer, every promise, every person in the room when you signed what you signed. You give me names and numbers and times. You do not lie. Not once. If you don't know, you say you don't know. If you guess, you say you're guessing. If you lie, I will know. I am your father." For 30 minutes, he talked. The words came in clumps at first. The guy with the watch who always smelled like expensive cologne and said he had family money, the office with frosted glass, and the receptionist who never looked up, the pitch deck with pictures of houses that weren't theirs. Then the details sharpened, the time of the wire, the name on the cashier's check that covered fees, the bar where they toasted the clothes, the Instagram story he posted and then deleted because the caption sounded too much like bragging about something that wasn't finished. Mark wrote fast, precise. Tanya's camera watched without blinking. When he was done, he sagged. "There is a posture our bodies take when they finally tell the truth. The muscles unclench and reveal the cost the lie had extracted." He looked older, and not in a way that made him trustworthy. I stood because sitting felt like concession. "There is one more thing," I said. "You will not come to my house. You will not come to my job. You will not call me at night. You will deal with Mark. If you want to say you're sorry, you will say it to the judge when she asks if you understand what you did. I hope you do. I don't believe you do. But I hope." He nodded. Once, a motion so small it would have been easy to miss. He stood too. For a fraction of a second, he looked like he might reach out. He did not. He walked to the door and paused there like a man about to step into whether he hadn't dressed for. "Dad?" he said. "Yes." He swallowed. "I thought I could make it right before you noticed." "That sentence," I said, "contains every mistake you keep making." He left. I didn't realize I'd been holding the back of the chair until my palm lifted and the indent of my hand remained briefly in the cheap vinyl. Mark gathered the papers. Tanya clicked the camera off. The room felt larger, like we had somehow pushed the walls back a few inches. "We'll file the consent first thing Monday," Mark said. "Carter will be made whole. We'll coordinate with the DA. Drake will avoid service for a while, but he can't outrun it forever. And your house? He let the sentence hang because he knew I knew the end. Your house will be your house again." I nodded. The tide was still out there, moving whether or not I watched. "Thank you," I said, and meant it with the kind of gratitude men find hard to express until someone moves a mountain for them on paper. After they left, I stood at the window watching a woman smoke beneath an awning across the alley. The rain had turned to a fine drizzle. She flicked ash into a puddle and stared at her own reflection. I made another espresso and realized the machine here did it better than I used to at home, and the thought scraped me raw for a beat. I let it. Then I put the cups in the sink and cleaned the counter with the care I could feel in my shoulders. Order. Order. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Carter. If you need me to sign anything for Monday, send it over. My son wants to see the maple again before school starts." I smiled at the screen, not because of the tree, though I loved that tree, but because of the sentence's quiet faith. People still believed in things. I did too. That afternoon, I drove to the house with Mark's copy of the TRO in my glove box like a passport. I didn't go inside. I walked the perimeter, the way a man does when he's making sure the fence is still where he left it. The porch boards creaked under my weight and said yes in their old language. The maple shivered and threw a little water on me, and I laughed out loud in the empty yard, which probably looked like madness to the neighbor, who peered through the blinds and then pretended she hadn't. On the way back to the motel, I stopped at a hardware store and bought a brass key tag. At the register, the clerk asked if I wanted them to engrave it. I said yes without thinking and wrote 2 lines, printing carefully so it would be legible in metal. When the machine finished its small work, the tag came out warm in my hand. It said home on the first line and earned on the second. It wasn't for Ethan. It wasn't even for the front door. It was for me. That night, rain came hard for 10 minutes and then stopped as if someone had turned a dial. I lay in the motel dark and thought about a boy in dinosaur pajamas who once fell asleep on my chest on that old sofa and drooled on my shirt. I let myself miss him. I let myself grieve the version of him that never learned to tell the truth before he wanted something. Then I let morning come, because it always does. Monday would return the money to Carter and return the title to me and everything but the last stamp. Tuesday would bring calls from a DA's office that would sound professional and heavy. Wednesday would be for locksmiths and paint and small repairs you do when you have walked through a storm and want the house to smell like lemon oil and beginnings. And somewhere in there would be a knock at a different door, Drake's, and a man with a badge would say a name like a sentence. I didn't need to be there for that music. I just needed to let it play. I set my phone on the nightstand and closed my eyes. For the first time in a week, sleep came without a fight. Monday morning broke clear, the kind of washed clean blue sky that only comes after a hard rain. I was up before the alarm, dressed, and sitting in the driver's seat outside the escrow office 15 minutes before they opened. Mark arrived on the dot, leather fully under his arm. That calm in his stride that comes from knowing every piece is already where it needs to be. Inside, the air smelled faintly of fresh coffee and toner. Carter was there too, hands in the pockets of a windbreaker, his son hovering near the reception desk, peering into a bowl of complimentary mints like they might be treasure. We shook hands, firm and without ceremony. No speeches, just 2 men with a shared understanding. A wrong had been set right. The escrow officer printed the wire confirmation. The funds were already on their way back to Carter's account. He nodded once, folded the paper, and slipped it into his pocket like it was nothing more than a receipt for groceries. "Thank you," he said simply, and left with his boy, who glanced back at me once before following him out into the sunlight. By 10 a.m., the deed was voided, the title restored, and the lease pendants marked satisfied. The maple tree was mine again, and everything it stood for. The next call came from the DA's office. The investigator's voice was clipped and efficient. They had reviewed Mark's package, forged documents, notary irregularities, bank records, Ethan's signed acknowledgement. They would be filing charges, felony forgery, elder financial abuse, and wire fraud. Given his cooperation, the investigator said, "We'll recommend probation over prison, but the restitution order will be firm." Restitution. That meant garnished wages, monthly checks with his name in the corner, a slow drip of consequence that would follow him for years. And community service, 200 hours, assigned to the county homeless shelter. The same shelter that had taken me in for 3 nights the year after his mother left, when I was one paycheck from the street. If irony had a mailing address, that was it. When I told Mark I planned to be at the sentencing, he didn't try to talk me out of it. "Keep it short," he advised. "Judges appreciate brevity." I did. When the time came, I stood in the wood-paneled courtroom, the smell of varnish and dust thick in the air, and told the judge exactly what Ethan had done, what it had cost me, and why I believed restitution mattered more than prison. The judge, a woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that could cut glass, nodded once and handed down the sentence without flourish. It was done. Ethan didn't look at me as he was let out. I didn't expect him to. 3 weeks later, I stood at the threshold of my house. The locksmith had just finished, the new brass keys warm in my palm. The maple out front was budding, tiny green leaves trembling in the spring wind. I stepped onto the porch and heard the boards creak that familiar greeting. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and old paint, the smell of a space waiting to be lived in again. Room by room, I walked it like a man reacquainting himself with an old friend. The living room, its floors catching the light in the late afternoon. The kitchen, countertops cool under my hand. Upstairs, the bedroom where the curtains still held a faint sun-faded line from where the dresser used to sit. Every mark, every scratch on the wood was a piece of my story, the honest kind, earned over years, not stolen in a week. That night, I didn't unpack everything. I didn't need to. I made a simple dinner, ate it at the kitchen counter, and watched the sun set through the back window. For the first time in months, I slept in my own bed, the kind of deep sleep that comes when the lock on the door answers to your key again. In the months that followed, the reports trickled in. Ethan at the shelter, sorting donations and cleaning floors, the garnishments hitting his account like clockwork. The occasional message passed through Mark, short, polite updates about his progress, each one ending with a variation of "I'm working on it." I never replied. I heard, through Carter, that his son had visited the maple tree one Saturday, standing under its branches like it was an old friend. That made me smile, the thought of someone else appreciating its shade, even for a moment. By summer, I had refinished the porch swing, oiled the chains until they sang soft when they moved. I'd repainted the trim, planted new flowers in the beds out front. The house looked like it belonged to someone who loved it again. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I'd think about Ethan, about the boy who once brought me a dandelion like it was gold, about the man who sold my house like it was scrap. I didn't pretend those two people were the same, but I didn't deny they were connected either. People are complicated like that. I didn't get my son back, but I got my home, my peace, and something else I hadn't expected, the understanding that value isn't measured in someone else's approval. It's measured in what you're willing to fight for when someone tries to take it. 2 days ago, I walked out to the mailbox and found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a folded piece of paper. One sentence in Ethan's handwriting: "I'm sorry. I mean it this time." I stood there a while, the maple's leaves whispering overhead, and then I folded the note back into the envelope and placed it in the drawer by the door. Maybe I'll answer someday. Maybe I won't. For now, I have my house, my key, my peace. And sometimes that's enough.